Hello, everyone. Recently, Dave Rubin interviewed Stefan Molyneux, and Stefan had many profoundly wrong things to say. So I'm going to comment on them and explain why they are wrong and what is right. Now, if you are rolling your eyes at the title of this video, then you have made a major mistake. First of all, I regularly call Trump a fascist, and I regularly call people racist, because I don't exist in this fog most people exist in. I use words accurately, and I'm not giving them up just because other people don't. If your response to leftists using the term racism inaccurately is to give up using it altogether, you have made a major mistake. That doesn't solve anything, and it misses the point entirely. That is totally superficial and linguistic. What's wrong is that they are defining the concept incorrectly. Your response to that cannot be, well, let's just stop using the noise. No. Define the concept correctly and then use it. Because guess what? Racism is still bad, and it's important to point it out. I mean, that's just one more manifestation of the impotence of all of these so-called good guys today. The classical liberals. Anyway, so I cut this interview, which is a little over an hour long, down to about 15 minutes, and can be divided into two parts, the religion and ethics part and the race and IQ part. And no, I'm not going to call him racist because he links race and IQ. So anyway, let's get right into this.
You know, I'm not religious myself, but it is a godless world in Hollywood. And I don't know that they have the kind of abstract ethics that would cause that restraint or that cognizance. You know, the one great thing about Christianity is how it talks about the devil and temptations and fallen humanity that puts you on guard against your worst self. And if you're not on guard against your worst self and you have that kind of power, I think it's a real slippery slope.
It's interesting you just ended that with that about atheism and Christianity, because I've noticed lately, and I'm around obviously a lot of atheists, and I've talked to a lot of atheists and believers and half believers and non-believers and whatever it is. But I do sense a little bit in the atheist community that there's, because secularism has gone so awry suddenly, or whatever, not secularism as much as just our systems seem to be struggling right now, that I do sense that people have a little more respect for certain pieces of religion a little bit. Does that make sense to you?
I would certainly be the poster boy for that, for what it's worth. I was very harsh on Christianity earlier in my career, and I have apologized for that, and I have withdrawn from that position, because the one thing that atheists, I mean, intellectually, the position of atheism is very hard to assail. Because you have to go with faith, and if you have an empirical, rational view of the universe, faith doesn't cut it. Faith is, you know, I'm right.
It's
you know, closing your eyes and saying that you're seeing something different is not the same as being scientific. So intellectually, atheism is a very, very easy position. But the great challenge, I think, that has happened, you know, seeing how the rise of atheism is causing also a rise in state power. It is causing a decay in borders and boundaries in nation states. It is causing a moral collapse across society. It is causing a blurring of rational biological categories and empirical methodologies. So I think the big concern I have is something like this, that the world is a difficult and dangerous place, and we need, I mean, the world within our own hearts and the world that is out there, we need ways to guide ourselves. We need ethics. We need morality. Mm-hmm. Now, atheists looked at religion and said, not true. And again, metaphysically, epistemologically, it's really hard to sustain the argument for religion. But why did people believe in God? Did they believe in God because they genuinely believed that loaves could be turned into fishes and water could be turned into wine and people could walk on water? I would say no. I mean, people didn't believe of that. That was a way that they expressed why they found it so important, that it's miraculous.
So we are to believe that most religious people do not actually believe in the metaphysics and epistemology of their religion. They don't believe in the supernatural, really. They don't believe in faith or revelation, really. They just think it's important to have restrictions on people's actions, and miracles are just the way you do that. Or just a way of expressing how important that is. If you think that's what religious people believe today, let alone throughout history, well, you're wrong. Now, this shows Stefan's utter lack of understanding about morality. Now, this guy claims Ayn Rand is a genius, and he was obviously influenced by her, but like many people who read everything Ayn Rand ever wrote and claimed to be influenced by her, he missed the point entirely. I can't imagine... I mean, he obviously got nothing of substance from her. So he has this idea that we all just know what's right and wrong. Ethics is just obvious. The content of ethics is just obvious. And it's just a matter of getting people to do it. And so, metaphysics and epistemology, that's just rationalization for getting people to do what we know they should do. No, that's wrong. People decide what they should do based on what they think the nature of the universe is and how they know it. That's metaphysics and epistemology. But you see Stefan, he's saying, well, no, they didn't really believe in God or miracles or revelation. That was all just to get people to do what we all know we should do anyway. That is a ridiculously superficial position for a philosopher like Stefan Molyneux to hold. The miraculous part of religion is the most important part. People love the miraculous part. That's the whole core of it. Or the absolute foundation. The idea that the laws of reality can be suspended, and so anything can happen. This is what justifies faith. This is what justifies, well, all of the irrational things religion tells you to do, because, well, yeah, maybe it doesn't make sense, but sense is based on cause and effect, and that can be suspended at any moment by God, who's looking out for you and designing things, and he's interfering and suspending the laws for the best at his discretion. So don't worry about anything that doesn't make sense. And that's the secret desire of religious people, to not have to worry about whether things make sense.
But I think that they believed in religion because it gave a structure of self-restraint that is essential for civilization. And we can talk about this with the book, that you need to restrain your own capacity for violence and dominance and aggression and bullying in order to have rational discussions. So people took shelter in the church. And the atheists came along and they said, that church is terrible. That church is not a valid structure. And they ripped the roof off the church. But it's hailing and there's lightning and people are then exposed to the elements above. Now, okay, rip the roof off the church, but you better build another structure for people to get to.
Right, so that's the missing piece.
That's the missing piece, and this is why one of the first things I did as a public intellectual was work on a rational system of ethics, because we need to have a reason to have self-restraint. If we don't have a reason to have self-restraint, our inner apes come out and it just becomes about power and control.
Yeah, you go ahead and read about his rational system of ethics. If you know Ayn Rand and you read him, you would recognize in him what you see in a lot of people, which is that they take from Ayn Rand, don't understand what she said, and then mistake their mistakes for improvements on Ayn Rand, and then wrap her philosophy and their mistakes together with a bow on top and say, here's my superior philosophy. I solved the problems Ayn Rand couldn't solve. I'm not sure I'd call him a philosopher at all, given some of his positions regarding the role of ideas in people's lives, but we will get to that shortly.
It's interesting because I had a really great discussion on this with Michael Shermer and with Dennis Prager, and Michael is an atheist and a skeptic, and basically Dennis said that on the micro level, he's like, yeah, you can be moral. I have no doubt that you're moral, looking at him in the face. I have no doubt that you're moral and all of those things. But on the macro level for society, and that's really what you're talking about, that there isn't enough of a structure otherwise. Right. I think there's an interesting argument there for sure.
Well, to me, atheist ethics is like, it's like diets for thin people. Yeah. I mean, if you're already thin,
well, I guess
you don't need the diet.
They would say it's enlightenment values.
Well, basically. Okay, but they can say enlightenment values, but the reason we need ethics are for people who really want to do evil. You don't, I mean, you're a nice guy, I'm a nice guy. We're not sitting there going, okay, there's a homeless guy, there's a cinder block. I could go drop the cinder block. We don't have those impulses. So for me, I don't have to fight this demonic lust for, what. But there are people out there who really want that. And the fear of the devil and the fear of hell and the fear of eternal damnation kept those people in check. It was like a little prison that they could walk around inside of. They could rattle the cages and so on, but it kept them restrained.
Right. It's sort of a depressing view of what humanity is in a way. It's like that some people could escape it, and some people just need it, is sort of, and I guess that you could eventually get out of it would be the hope if that's what it is, right?
How did this guy read Ayn Rand? He calls her a genius. If he called me a genius, I would be insulted. Ayn Rand talked about how it's not the critics who slander you or get everything wrong that bother you. It's the ones that praise you and get everything wrong while they're thinking that they're being positive. That's what hurts. But Stefan calls Jordan Peterson supernaturally intelligent and bows down to him near the end of this interview. The clip isn't in here, but I mean, anybody who has that evaluation is, you're not dealing with a serious intellect there. I mean, I don't know, he read Ayn Rand and all the pages about ethics were ripped out? Even if you don't agree with her, I just can't understand how you can be so simple-minded, so unsophisticated on the topic after having read her. This just goes to show. Reading something or hearing an argument does not compel understanding. This is a proof of free will here. You have to focus. You have to exert effort in order to understand something. Just hearing a combination of words is not enough. So this idea that ethics is really just about stopping you from doing bad things, and that if you don't have these urges, then you don't really need ethics. This is just total subjectivism, mixed with intrinsicism. It's the worst of both worlds. So it's one, we just know some things are intrinsically wrong. I mean, as I mentioned before, it's just, ethics is so simple. We just know some things are wrong. Why? We just know. We just take that for granted. We don't know how, they just are intrinsically. And so we need ethics to stop those things. Okay, so that's the intrinsicist part. And then the subjectivist part is, well, once we have ethics to stop those things, that's all we really need it for. What should you do positively? Psh, who cares? Ethics is all about telling you what not to do. It's all about thou shalt not. And then what should you do? Who cares? Just don't do these bad things. That's a pretty pathetic guide to action. It doesn't really give you a hell of a lot of advice. It says don't do these shockingly, viscerally violent things that cause pain, which people just take as, well, that would be painful for me, and it's disturbing, and I don't really know why, but it causes bad emotions, so that must be wrong. So just don't do that, and then besides that, do whatever. That's the view of ethics here. No. Ethics is about providing you a positive course about directing your positive course of action. It's not just, don't do this because that will mess things up. It's do all these things because that's what will lead to your success, your happiness. This is a very negative view of morality, and this is why people don't like morality, and they think of it as this ball and chain and this awful thing, and it's just a negative. No, it's a positive. Morality is there to help you be happy. That was a viewpoint Ayn Rand brought back after 2,500 years. But that's obviously not what Stefan believes. So, let's go on to the next big mistake.
Well, the data seems to be pretty clear that if you're raised peacefully as a child, raised reasonably as a child, not hit, not screamed at, not yelled at, not neglected, then you're going to grow up to be a good person with empathy and so on. But, you know, like there's a couple of percentage points out there, people who are genuine sociopaths and psychopaths, no conscience, no remorse, will to power stuff. What is going to restrain them? Well, in the past, there was the devil, there was hell, and there was condemnation and ostracism by the community based on universally held moral values. The atheists came along and, okay, undoing God is one thing, undoing ethics is quite another. And if atheists say, well, you know, but we're good, it's like, not all atheists are good. And when people give up on God and then they give up on morality as a result, I think what we end up missing is not God, but morality. And if we don't have that need for self-restraint, if we don't have an understanding of the darker side of human nature, which we all carry, which we're all susceptible to, the atheists have a very optimistic view that if you remove superstition from people's lives, paradise. And I don't see that particularly playing out.
Why? Why don't you see that playing out? I don't see it playing out, but what you said makes no sense. It's true, yes, if you just remove superstition, that's not going to get rid of all problems. People still need something positive to believe in. But the problem here is that Stefan Molyneux doesn't believe that himself because he thinks ethics is just negative, and anything outside of that is subjective, apparently. So, what does he want? Well, let's see.
Right. I guess this is where Jordan Peterson, who you've had on your show several times and I've had on a bunch of times, would talk about these archetypes, that we just need them.
Yeah.
But it's so interesting because you yourself are an atheist, and in a way, anyone listening to that 5 minutes that we just did would go, this guy doesn't sound like much of an atheist, but I get you're making the separation between your own intellect and society. I think it's a really rich spot.
Well, I mean, this is just a question which, you know, people who are watching and listening to this, Dave, can just go to the worst person they know and try and merely reason them into being a good person. No, it is a tough row to hoe. Like I do a call-in show every week, do hours and hours of talking with people about philosophy and virtue and how to improve their lives and so on. And it's hard. You know, people go and try and talk other people into being good, and it's really, really tough. On the other hand, if you are religious and it's, you know, hellfire, damnation, that's going to get people's attention. Now you have, in a sense, you have heaven to offer them and you have hell to punish them with.
Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Well, first, have you ever considered, Stefan, that maybe your arguments just aren't very good? Or maybe it takes a lot of time, more time than you've spent so far. It takes time to change a culture and an individual. I think that's the truth in general, although in Stefan's case, I think it's just that his arguments aren't very good or convincing. But this idea, you see it creeping out, right? Well, we can't really reason people into the truths. What we really need is heaven and hell, some kind of fictitious threat. He's going to get more into that in the next clip, but just for now, this idea that it's so hard and we can't change people's mind with reasoned debate. Are you kidding me? The whole history is a proof of the fact that philosophers rule the world. Whoever had the most arguments within the context of presenting them, getting them out in the culture, the most consistent arguments win. The most rational ones win. Again, within the bounds of what practically gets out there and whether people push it enough. But there have been vastly different societies throughout history. All of them based on the ideas that people were convinced of at the time. It is totally possible to change the nature of the entire world based on arguments. I'm sorry, Stefan, you didn't do it with your dumb arguments. in the course of a decade or however long you've been doing this, but that strongly suggests that you are just looking for an excuse, because this idea that persuasion doesn't work, that's BS. If you're good at it, and if you're principled and you have something good to offer and you're passionate, you can change people's minds. I have done it myself through my own example. Everywhere I go, I feel like I'm starting a mutiny. Because I act my way, I do things my way, and I know what I'm doing, and I know what I'm talking about, and I don't push it on other people. But people see that in me, and then they start changing around me, being like me. That's even without arguments. And then when they want to know, what's this guy doing? I can explain it to them, and it's plausible, and people start changing. Now, if you offer the insipid garbage that Molyneux offers, where you miss the point, and your passion is misplaced or non-existent, and you don't offer anything positive because morality is all about the negative, well, yeah, it's going to be pretty hard to convince people of anything. All right, next thing.
Now, for us as a society, I don't think you actually need heaven and hell, but you need rewards and punishments, and jail is not enough. So the rewards and punishment that normally occur within society are acceptance and ostracism. There have been studies that show that if you are ostracized by a community, it evokes the same mental and emotional and physical states as direct physical torture. And for obvious biological reasons, we needed the cooperation of the tribe to reproduce, to survive, to flourish. But we don't have because we've got this big giant redistributionist welfare state, we don't have the capacity to ostracize anyone anymore. People, there used to be this very tight control over teenage sexuality in the past. And there was chaperones and the shotgun weddings and so on, right?
Right.
Maybe a little too far in some ways, but why did people care so much about youthful sexuality? Why was there no sex before marriage and so on? Because if your daughter got pregnant and there was no one around to be her husband and take care of her, you as the parents would have to pay to raise that child. She'd move in with you, and then your whole retirement plans would get scotched, and there wouldn't be any playing baccarat on the southern Riviera of France or something. And so you had a direct impulse. But now there's this big welfare state. It's not that great, but it doesn't directly impact me. So we've lost the capacity to ostracize people. And if you don't have hell and you don't have ostracism, what the hell causes people to restrain their bad behavior? I don't have an answer. Maybe there is one. If the audience want to let us know, I'd love to hear it, but I haven't seen one yet.
Well,
oh, Stefan. How about reality? How about the factual requirements of happiness? Maybe that will restrain people from being self-destructive. No, you know what? It must be some fictitious threat, some heaven or hell, or social ostracism. Now, what's important to recognize here is he is not advocating social ostracism on the grounds of any rational basis. It is an irrational thing to him. That's the form in which he's advocating it. It's not, we are going to ostracize you on the basis that you've done something wrong for this reason. No. It's just ostracism as such. Now, I'm a big fan of opprobrium, but on the basis of reality, not as this irrational analog, this fictitious analog to heaven and hell, to an afterlife. I mean, you see what he's saying here. What he's saying here is most people are too dumb. They need threats of a kind that are not actually based on anything. I mean, you see his evolutionary psychology voodoo here. Well, why we evolved to want to work with the collective and be approved of by everyone. So he's really saying, well, let's just take this convenient evolutionary tool we have, this button we can press, and let's use that against people, because you know what? Convincing people of ideas is really hard, and I know I'm a philosopher, but whew, convincing people of ideas, that's not what I signed up for. Well, I don't know what he's doing as an alleged philosopher. If he doesn't think convincing people of ideas is the way to go, and instead we have to threaten them with things that aren't based on anything, but But he's not doing philosophy, that's for damn sure. So this is the Philosopher-King part. And this is the end of the first part. Philosopher-King Stefan Molyneux. He knows the truth. Most people are too dumb, so let's just threaten them with irrational things. And this is why religion was so good, because it had these... Because they didn't really believe in the supernaturalism and the faith and the irrationality. They just understood, really, they just understood that people need restraints. And that's really what religion was all about. And that's what I'm all about, too. And even if we don't need religion, we need some kind of artificial threat with no foundation. So he says we don't need it to be religion. But in his view, it may as well be. It doesn't matter. It's just as fictitious. I really believe if Stefan had not been so public in his strident atheism for so long, he would already be a deist. He would already have turned more than he has. Now, if he lives long enough, he will become some kind of religious person. He will start to believe in some way. He has no foundation for anything he believes. He's just incoherent and lost. Now, he may not live long enough, but people have to be consistent. The middle, the a la carte idea, that is not stable. It is radioactive. People tend toward consistency. And his ideas they're trending in the direction of being pro-religious. And that's where he's going to end up if he doesn't change something. Assuming he lives long enough. Maybe he won't, but if he does, it would not surprise me at all to have a kind of weakly religious deist Stefan Molyneux in the decades to come. John Stuart Mill ended up as a kind of socialist. Thomas Aquinas allegedly burned all of his work, saying it was garbage at the end of his life. When you have a contradiction in your thought, one side is going to win. Mixes are not stable. I mean, mixes of contradiction. So, if you think religion doesn't make sense, and yet we need it to threaten people with for morality's sake, well, that's a big old contradiction, and one side is going to win. And I think we can see which side Stefan Molyneux is trending toward. Alright, now for the fun race stuff.
But this is the thing, right? So if you're looking at East Asians with very high spatial IQ, they're going to be, quote, overrepresented in those engineering fields and so on, but not because everyone who's got that IQ is up there. There just happen to be more of those, right? Mm-hmm. You've got your run-of-the-mill vanilla Caucasians coming in at 100. And 100 is just, I don't know, it's just the baseline. They recalibrate it from time to time and so on. And then below, some of this, what are mestizos or Hispanic sometimes called, although that's a very loosey-goosey term, and that's sort of 85, 90, and so on. And then you've got blacks in North America, particularly African Americans, coming in at 85, and there's been some upward drift a little bit. And then below that, you start to get sub-Saharan blacks, 70. There are pygmies in the high 50s, low 60s. There are the indigenous people of Australia, I think, in the low 60s. And some of these numbers, again, I don't have them all tattooed on my wrist or anything. But so there is this range. It is unbelievably heartbreaking. I mean, just I'm straight up about all of this. Like, this is one of the most difficult facts I've ever had to absorb in my life. I mean, I've gone through a bunch of iterations as a thinker. I was a Christian and a socialist and all. I mean, I'm going to go through a whole journey. But I found almost nothing harder to absorb than this question of differences in IQ between groups. And this goes back many, many decades. This was talked about by Herrnstein in Murray, of course, in the bell curve in 94. And nobody's been able to overturn that. And their basic argument is to say, look, blacks make less money than Ashkenazi Jews. But if you normalize by IQ, they don't. And this is, again, it's heartbreaking stuff, and it is so difficult to absorb this into your daily thinking. Because,
go
ahead.
Well, I just want to pause you for a second, because it's interesting you're describing it as heartbreaking and struggle, because that's what I was going to ask you, is that because you do talk about this stuff, I was going to ask you, are you troubled by it?
Oh, it's horrible.
Because I don't know that I've gotten that exactly through your videos, but I obviously haven't seen everything that you've done on this. So hearing you frame it in that way is actually different than a bit of the impression I had of you on this.
Oh, do you know how much I would give, Dave, to know that it was just racism? Because that's a solvable problem. And people have been working on trying to solve the problem of racism, well, for hundreds of years. I mean, it is, I mean, I wouldn't say I give my left arm because I'm left-handed, but I would give a lot.
Lefty too.
I would give so much for it to just be racism.
This is why I decided to record a commentary on this. Now, if that did not strike you as profoundly racist, you have to reorganize your intellectual framework. Why? Why is it a tragedy for race to be linked to IQ? That makes no sense unless you're racist. How? Well, so the idea here is being a janitor. That's fine, right? It's not a tragedy that somebody's a janitor. But suddenly, if all janitors happen to share the same skin color, now it's a tragedy. Why? Why is that a tragedy? Why is it okay for one person, but now suddenly if everybody who does a certain kind of job shares a superficial characteristic, now it's some awful thing? What sense is there in that? Well, you know what's going on, of course. This is racial collectivism, otherwise known as racism. This is, look, what matters is black people as a transcendent entity. One black person having this horrible job of janitor, that doesn't matter. But if all black people have it, that hurts the entity of black people. It's like, say you get annoyed mowing your lawn. Well, you don't spend every day mowing your lawn. But if one person just had to take on the burden of mowing everybody's lawn, and that's all he did, that would be bad. Now, this is how they're treating it. Every individual black person is just one cell of the greater organism of black people. So if black people just have one of their members doing this horrible job, well, it doesn't really matter because it's just like mowing your lawn every once in a while. But if that's all you do, that's bad. So if all black people do it, now it's bad. They don't care about the individual black person because he's unreal compared to the entity of black people. Now, if black people are all doing the janitor jobs, it's like doing nothing but mowing your lawn. It's the primary unit. The unit of reality is the racial group, not the individual. They don't care about you. They care about your group. Stefan cares about your group and not you. So why does it matter that valued characteristics are unevenly distributed among racial groups? So project this horrible dystopian future in which all Asians do chemistry and all white people do teaching and they're lawyers, and all black people are janitors and construction workers, and all Indians do software. Who cares? What matters is, are people doing what they should be doing, judged by voluntary interaction? Are they qualified for this? Does this make them happy? Is this what benefits other people? Are these all win-win relationships? Everybody getting allocated by nature, by the natural process of the win-win voluntary exchanges in capitalism. Okay, why does it matter that people are segregated based on racial characteristics? Now remember, you can't say, well, because that implies prejudice and racism. No, it doesn't. Because the whole point here is, theoretically, assuming there's some link here between certain kinds of aptitude for certain kinds of thing, and race, this is just where they would end up objectively. And if you took any individual, you wouldn't say, this isn't where he'd belong. You say, yeah, this is exactly where he belongs. But now if where somebody belongs starts to concentrate people of certain superficial characteristics together, it's this huge problem. Why? It isn't a huge problem. Who cares? It makes no difference. If you're a construction worker, that's good or bad. And if you notice that all the other construction workers happen to share your skin color or don't, that makes no difference to you. So this idea that once a bunch of people of the same skin color start doing something, well, now it's some horrible tragedy, that's racist. That is concern with the group and a total lack of concern for the individual, and that is what Stefan Molyneux is exhibiting here. Like, tragic? What? He's so concerned about this. The degree to which he thinks this is a tragedy is the degree to which he is a racist, because it doesn't matter even if certain valued characteristics are linked with race. So I just can't stress enough the importance of the mistake here. This is a terrible, terrible reaction to have to the idea that race and IQ are linked. It doesn't matter. We already know people are unequal. What matters is getting people into the positions where they can do the best they can, which means a system of freedom where people can choose where they end up. It's not a tragedy that some people are best fit to be janitors and some are smarter than others, and so it's not a tragedy if all the people of a certain level of value in a specific field or in general happen to share some superficial characteristic. That makes no difference, again, unless you're a racial collectivist and your view is that what matters are the groups, not the individuals in them. And so it's not a tragedy for one person to do a kind of job, but it's a tragedy if the racial group does a kind of job. Well, I'm not racist, so that kind of voluntary, objective, reality-based segregation based on values that happen to be, it's not segregation based on race. It ends up in this hypothetical scenario, which I think is totally implausible anyway, and we'll get to that in the next clip, but if this were the case, it doesn't matter, and to care about it is racist.
So if you look at criminality, right? I mean, as you know, black males are, young black males, 3 to 4% of the American population responsible for more than 50% of the homicides. You look at what goes on in the South Side Chicago. It's horrible. And yet, in general, it is not, if you normalize by IQ, everybody who has an IQ of 85 has similar levels of criminality. Whites in America have a certain particular level of homicide that's pretty low. And whites around the whole world have the same level of homicide. Whites in England, whites in Belgium, whites in America, all have the same level of homicide. And the question, of course, is environment versus genetics. Mm-hmm. I would love to have a clear answer to that. Science is making its way forward, but it's such a volatile topic that a lot of scientists would rather do anything than delve into this particular topic. But it's extraordinarily heartbreaking, and it means to me that no amount of screams of racism can be guaranteed to solve the problem. And I think, isn't that what we've seen? That the consciousness about race and racism has gone up so enormously. And good, because there was definite racism in the world. Mm-hmm. But without this central fact, and it is a fact at the moment, even if we say it's 100% environmental, it's still a fact at the moment. Even if we say,
but is there evidence that it's genetic?
Yes.
I'm not a geneticist.
Yes.
So genetic in what regard? I mean, if we took the brain of a 25-year-old black man and the brain of a 25-year-old white man, what is it that they're doing that...
different sizes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, this is dependent on every ethnicity, the higher IQ. In general, there's lots of exceptions and so on. There are different sizes. There is evidence that if you take a white kid from a middle-class household, for whatever reason, ends up being raised by a black family, the white kid's going to end up about 100 IQ. If you take the average black kid, have them raised by an upper-class middle white family or a Jewish family and so on, they're going to end up at about 85. So it does not appear to be strongly environmental. I don't believe that there's no environmental causes. I've done lots of videos where I strongly urge the black community to breastfeed longer, to not hit their children, to do things that will give their kids the best shot at having higher IQs, because that's going to make a huge amount of difference in American society. And this is something that people need to talk about more, is the quality in black parenting, quality of black parenting around the world. But where in America the most could possibly be done is still quite low. They hit their kids the most, and if that can be improved, who knows what could change.
Nature versus nurture, huh? What about the individual? What about his influence on what he does? What about free will? It's important right off the bat, just to make clear that an individual determines his own life. You choose what your character and intellect is going to be. Now, you say, oh, but what about the fact that most people born into Catholic families end up Catholic? Doesn't that show people don't choose? No, it doesn't. What it shows is people choose, most people, the vast majority of people do, empirically, choose just to go with whatever is around them. But there are exceptions everywhere, and being an exception is open to everyone. So, the difference is, if you choose to just drift and go along with your surroundings, then your environment really matters. And your genetic predispositions matter if you're not going to take manual control. So let's be as sympathetic as possible here. Let's strain credulity and say, well, these different races have different predispositions, and if you don't work really hard, you're just given a certain starting point, and those certain starting points are quite different. Now, this is highly dubious. You can even take the example of the white kid raised by a black family and a Jewish kid raised by a black family, and the white kid ends up like white people, black kid ends up like black people. Well, that's just because, and I know leftists use this systemic idea as a kind of just, this mist that floats around and it oppresses people, but the culture is the transmission belt for the ideas of philosophers. You absorb ideas everywhere. Movies, books, comic books, the news, stand-up comedians. The reason most black people in the first place have it the way they do is not a history of slavery. It's because in the 60s, white leftist professors targeted them with identity politics. They destroyed that culture with ideas and reinforced it with government, welfare, and other things. And that's why you see this only with black people. It's nothing racial, but it shows up only in their race because built into the idea is that you should act differently if you're a certain race. It's like a, if you ever played Metal Gear Solid and Fox Die, it's like a genetically targetable disease. Anybody can contract it, but it only hurts you or kills you if it matches your specific DNA. That's what these ideas are like. So yeah, all white people believe the same things, but built into the idea is that it applies differently to you if you're black. Just take social justice today. black people and white people, social justice, blacks and whites, they believe the same thing, right? But the white people are these cowed allies, and the black people are the belligerent ones. It's the same ideas, but built in there is you act different based on your race. So it's all ideas. And a black kid raised by a white family, he's going to absorb those ideas. And most people, parents are not the only factor. So it's not implausible that these swap scenarios, they're not that reliable. They don't show that much because the vast majority of your influence is from the culture. So a black person raised by white people could very well absorb from the culture, oh, well, I'm not supposed to act white, though. I'm black, I'm oppressed, so I'm going to be like black people are supposed to be. But ideas have always been regarded as unscientific, unreal, and it's all about genetics, it's all about environment, so you have to be very, very skeptical when people start talking about genetic bases for differences between races or race-based differences. It's not impossible. Clearly, black people have big lips. Sorry, they do. I actually like them. That's one of the only things that makes some black women attractive. I love those big lips. Luscious. It's fun to say pretty for a black girl just to annoy people. If anything, I think black people are probably superior by any physical standard that's relevant today. There's a reason they win all these races. They are clearly genetically selected for in a way that other races aren't. So there obviously are genetic differences between races, and it would, it makes sense that there would be differences in the brain and possibly different starting points or caps. But in general, people overestimate differences in innate intelligence, so I'm skeptical of the same kind of conclusions between races. And again, this is just because, ideas and reason have been hated throughout history. All sides agree on that. Religious people don't like it. It's a challenge to God, and obviously the skeptics don't like it either because they believe reason is impotent, and everybody's materialistic or social deterministic. It's the value of ideas, cultural ideas, way undervalued. You can just see that the idea of psychological experiments, you can throw out every psychological experiment done in the last, since they thought of the idea of doing experiments in psychology. Because they don't control for the variable of ideas. They will... they'll do things like just all the famous psychological experiments you've seen. And then they act as if they can generalize based on those experiments the same way they can about gravity or the nature of some chemical or something. No, you idiots. What somebody believes is going to make a huge difference in terms of how susceptible he is to just obeying authority, how willing he is to do that. But they'll just do some of these experiments and say, well, that shows people are just like this. No. Ideas are a huge variable you're not controlling for here because you don't believe in ideas and you think it's all hot air and epiphenomenal and they don't matter. Anyway, so I'm not saying it's impossible that there can be links. It wouldn't determine your character or intelligence. There's always a range that you can actualize. But the idea that you have different starting points, that's there's nothing, you can't rule that out on philosophic grounds, but people jump to that way too quickly. There's no good evidence for that. And most of this is just supported by philosophical bias against reason. So anyway, Stefan Molyneux is racist and an aspiring philosopher-king. So, I've described him as a weasel in the past, and now I've described him as two more things. So, that's it for this episode. Oh, I should say, in the spirit of giving the devil his due, he did recently respond to a tweet by Conan O'Brien. Conan said he's ready for the all-female reboot of America, and Stefan said he's ready for the male reboot of Conan O'Brien. And I thought that was pretty good. Somebody can make me laugh. I'm more sympathetic, because it's hard. I mean, I know I laugh a lot, but usually it's hard to get a grip on just what it is that tickles me. But that was pretty good, so that's that. New videos will be up sometime, and there will be another episode of my podcast up on Monday. So, see you then.